Two MPs, one Labour, one Conservative, the Shadow Schools Minister for Labour, Mike Cain, and Jacob Rees-Mogg from the Conservatives. You were tipped as a speaker at one stage, weren't you, a future speaker? Anyway, what's the mood of Conservative MPs given the result? How would you describe it?
Since the 1922 committee meeting last night, the mood of Tory MPs is really very positive. That Theresa May's performance yesterday was very strong, and today people really want to get behind her, support her, and back her and get the government up and running.
What do you think of what Mr Corbyn said about how this might be a very short parliament, another election soon?
It's one of politicians and journalists' favourite sports, speculating about when the next election will be. And we thought all the fun of that was taken away by the Fixed Term Parliament Act, but it's back. I'd note that Attlee only managed 1 year with a small majority, but that Harold Wilson and Callaghan managed almost the whole of the 5-year period with a small majority. So sometimes you can go the whole time, sometimes you can't.
Mike Cain, what's your prediction about how long this Parliament's going to last? How do you see the months ahead?
Well, we saw the re-election of John Bercow today. I think the government would have dearly loved at one stage to have moved against him, but they were powerless to do so. And we saw a Prime Minister with all authority ebbed and gone away from her, unlike what Jacob was saying about the Wilson and Callaghan administrations, particularly Wilson. He was on the up, and you saw that upbeat mood today on the Labour benches.
Very different. I mean, I can remember lots of Prime Minister's questions where Labour MPs have sat on their hands, sat there with glum faces. A lot of humble pie being eaten by Labour MPs in the tea room, is there?
Well, I think what you saw was the party come together, particularly after the second leadership election, and you just saw one of the best campaigns of modern political history, which, produced a result that was absolutely unexpected, let alone 6 months ago, let alone 4 weeks ago. And you see now Labour back in the game, on the ascendancy, and who knows what will happen over the next few days.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, what are the really tricky problems facing Theresa May and the Conservative government? Brexit, I guess, is one. What do you see as the main challenges and the difficulties for Theresa May and the government now?
Within Parliament, I think Brexit is relatively straightforward because the Great Repeal Bill is contingent on the referendum result. What will be hard will be getting routine legislation through, and will be getting every detail of budgets through, and therefore the government will have to be very cautious about any legislative programme that it has. What it does as an executive doesn't need parliamentary consent, will be as straightforward as it normally is, but anything that requires legislation, other than, as I say, the Great Repeal Bill, is going to be hard.
The first time MPs will get a chance to vote, of course, will be on the Queen's speech. What's Labour's approach going to be on the Queen's speech? Mr Corbyn's talking about getting the other parties to come together. What chance is there of that, do you think, of a combined Labour, SNP and other parties joining together to either to put forward an alternative Queen's speech or vote the government's speech down?
Well, the first thing I'd say, John, we're 5 days after a general election with no sign of a government being formed and no end in sight of when a government will be formed. We don't know if we'll even be back next week for a Queen's speech yet or not. And at the moment, Labour sticking to its manifesto and not conducting negotiations with other parties. It'll be up to the Prime Minister to see if she can form a government, and as of yet there's been no sign of that.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, David Davis.
Because constitutionally it's not accurate. The government simply continues. That there has been no change of Prime Minister. An election does not mean the change of government. The government is not reappointed. The old government remains in office. So it's wrong to say there's been no formation of a government. The Queen's government is being carried on as usual.
Right, my question was going to be, David Davis and others have conceded that various bits of the Conservative manifesto are going to be dropped. Which bits of the Tory manifesto would you like to see dropped?
Well, I think it's a statement of the obvious that some bits will be dropped. I think the not fully thought through social care policy will be dropped. I expect the removal of the fuel allowance will be at least suspended or altered from what it would have been. I have a nasty feeling we'll find it much harder to get through the repeal of the vicious section of a bill on press freedom that we were going to do, because the Labour Party quite likes bashing our free press, and the House of Lords does too. So there'll be some very good things that we'll probably lose, as well as some things that weren't necessarily fully thought through.
What are the things that Labour will be demanding are dropped from the government's programme?
Well, the biggest vanity project for the Prime Minister's, which is a personal project for her, was grammar schools. She's reappointed Justine Greening, who marginally won her seat in Putney, and she's no fan of grammar schools. So she's got cabinet ministers now and the backbenchers calling the shots. She's in office but out of power.
What would you like to see happen to the grammar schools policy?
Well, as it happens, I support the grammar schools policy, but I thought it was a distraction in the election debate because it'll be a very small number of schools, even if it happens. I doubt there is now a majority to get grammar schools through, and you have to face political reality. Prime Ministers and Chief Whips always need to be able to count. They can't get their business through if they don't have a majority, and there's no point in using political capital up on things that simply won't get through Parliament. But that doesn't mean we can't have a government that is doing all sorts of other important things, ensuring that the Academies programme continues to roll out, which has been improving standards dramatically across the country. I'm sure you remember from the campaign 1.8 million more children in schools that are now good or outstanding thanks to academisation. So there's lots of good stuff that can carry on, and we can ignore the sideshows.
Very quick word, very quickly, you are the Shadow Schools Minister.
Interestingly, Jacob corrected me earlier, I'll correct him. No sign that academisation has improved standards. Those 1.8 million children are in schools that were identified by Labour in 2010 that needed improving, so they're dining out on Labour's records.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.